Hey, hey, dear beloveds. Oh, my eyes look a bit tired today. Do you know why? Because we had a thunderstorm in Melbourne last night, and my dog hates thunder. And it was one of those storms that just kind of rolled on and on and on. So, yeah, for hours, we were all awake except for my little one who slept all through it. So anyway, that's why my eyes are clearly looking a little tired today, but you'll forgive me. I'm excited to be here for day 13. We are almost at the end. So we will be going till Tuesday next week with our sacred and our shadow archetypes. And today was a bit of a wrestle for me about whether it was a sacred or a shadow, but it turned out that, like, I love the way this works. I pulled the cards out of the Sacred 13 pack just to have a look at who we had left. And the one who is coming today, so clearly not a shadow, it was like a flashing light going off on the card just out the side of my vision here all morning. And I'm like, okay, I get the point. I know who we're working with today. So we'll leave the shadow for now. It might be tomorrow, maybe it won't. Maybe we'll have 2 shadows in the final week. So we have, of the shadows remaining, the prostitute and the victim. So we will be hanging out with them, and we also have a few more of the Sacred 13 as well. So we've been blessed by having Renee Main channeling the goddess yesterday, and we have today with us the Maga. Now, the Maga is very special. I love this image from Christy Jameson in particular. The way that in all of the cards, you'll notice that Christy's used the lines and the way that they move out from the body of the archetype to indicate really the relationship to the chakra that they're working with. And this one I just particularly love. I just love that halo effect. But I want to talk a little bit about who the Maga is, because she is a fairly new archetype in terms of the pantheon of archetypes. And she represents a phase in a woman's life between the end of the mothering phase, the intensive early years of mothering, before the crone. So really this phase, if we looked at the traditional triptych of maiden, mother, crone, really hundreds of years ago women didn't live lives that were long enough to have a substantial period between the end of the mothering phase and the beginning of the crone phase. And now we see really the extension of what it is to be in our really productive middle years versus how it used to be. So if you look at women like Jennifer Lopez and Madonna and even, Hillary Clinton in her younger years, these women come into their power after those intensive early childhood rearing years are done, when those intensive phase of a woman's life where she's partnering and marrying and making babies, and that period before she becomes a crone. So if we look at what a woman in her 50s is now compared to what a woman in her 50s was even 30-40 years ago, you can see how that phase of a woman's life has become really something very, very productive and very powerful. It isn't just a slow descent into the crone and waiting to become a grandmother. It's really challenging the notions of a woman's right to be in possession of her independence and not to be defined simply by what phase of mothering or grandmothering she is at. And of course, the crone is incredibly powerful archetype for us to work with, but this phase of the Maga is really, really potent for a woman, because she's no longer seeking the external things that would define her. So for example, we may reach a certain age in our 20s or 30s where the yearning to become a mother becomes like a bomb going off inside of us, like a biological ticking clock. And the need to partner, or the feeling of that biological imperative to partner, means that we are really driven by some very primal survival instincts to make a good match. All of this is happening subconsciously because, it's our bodies responding to the pheromones of those around us, in order to make sure that we have viable children and that our partner is likely to not abandon us in the nest. These are all just primal instincts that are driving us, but they dominate our lives in our 20s and our 30s and sometimes into our 40s. But as we move out of those years of needing to find a partner to reproduce with, which is a biological thing, versus a partner who is there as a companion in all the other great ways, we find there's a sense of connection to our own power, our independence, our own self-approval. And perhaps the greatest tragedy of the Maga phase of a woman's life is if she is still behaving like a maiden. If she is rejecting the phase of her life that she's at, she's rejecting her wisdom, she's rejecting her lived experience in order to try and stay appealing in the way that the maiden in that sort of early 20s and 30s energy is. We see that absolute obsession with youth in our culture, so that there is this desire to stay really connected to looking as young as possible and looking as hot as possible. And once again, if we go back to the biological imperative, that's really about whether you are viable, fertile as a partner. And so to be driven by that in our 40s and 50s really does us a disservice, because that phase of our life is actually potentially the greatest phase, 40s, 50s and 60s, I should say, of personal freedom, of not needing to be, shackled to our children, to our homes, to be running a home, to be looking for a partner, to be seeking all of these things outside of us, but to actually emerge into the gloriousness of self-approval and the desire to create a life that is entirely based on our own needs, which is not selfish at all. So I hope that gives you some insight to the Maga, because she really is so powerful, and that's why we include her in the Sacred 13. There's 4 phases of a woman's life. But having said all of that, I really want you to understand, as it is with the Maiden Mother Crone, these are not necessarily only going to show up for you when you are at that chronological age in your own life. These are not literal, these are symbolic cards and archetypes. So the Maga energy can be with you when you're in your 20s or when you're 90 or when you're, whatever phase of your life you're at, because it's the qualities. Just as, I have the Maiden on my desk now. I'm 42. I'm not in my literal maiden years, but I am very much connecting to that Maiden energy right now as a way to reinvigorate renew and have that wide-eyed wonder and kind of innocence to my spiritual seeking, which has become quite heavy and burdensome of late. So I'm going to read to you about the Maga, and you may find that even though you're not in that phase of your life necessarily, your sense of connection to her might be there. It's a harder one for a lot of us to connect to, if, as I say, because culturally we're told that it's not okay for us to age, it's not safe for us to become less sexually appealing to men, that our primary goal is to entertain and privilege men's needs. That's just the facts of a patriarchy. That's not about individual men. It's just the way that we're raised as women to perceive ourselves. And when you speak to women of this age, they're very often refreshing in their absolute, I am not interested in getting anybody else's approval for my life, especially if they've allowed their maturing to be a blessing rather than a burden, because we're so afraid that our maturing suggests that we're no longer viable as members of our culture. So what does the Maga say on the back of this card? Without fear, I command the universe into action. I have occupied the sidelines long enough. I have been forgotten, set aside, abandoned, and overlooked. And finally, I hold a mirror up to my own glory and witness the creator that I am, without hesitation. For all I thought I wanted has been ripped asunder, and still I rise. I am the most dangerous force on the planet, for I do not need your approval, and yet still I have desire. And with that desire, I rip away the veil of illusion and reveal life. I am unstoppable in my power. And I just fucking love her, because, imagine if we had the Maga energy in our 20s and 30s and all those dumb boys that wanted to date us, or, inappropriate relationships we wanted to get ourselves in, with deep self-approval, you would have saved yourself so much time, right? So she's just this absolute fortress of power, of personal power, of absolute willingness to show up. And, in terms of our world now, the women who are in that Maga phase are the most powerful women on the planet, because their creative energy, their sexual energy is completely at their disposal. It's not being held ransom by anybody else. It's not, we haven't sold it for a sense of security to some random boy so that we can feel safe to have our babies with them. We're 100% in possession of ourselves, and we're often in a good space financially. This is often when marriages break down in the Maga phase, because that what you thought you needed out of your partner now no longer exists, because you don't need to protect your new babies in the way that you did at that early phase of parenting. I'm making it sound very sort of I guess harsh here, but that's, you know, so much of what we think is individual choice is actually biological imperative, and that we're just being motivated by these biological imperatives to sustain life. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you wake up to that, and as long as you become really clear on the fact that this Maga phase can feel like a phase of absolute radical transformation, where everything you thought was true and solid comes to an end. But that ending of that cycle is absolutely appropriate, because if we resist that change, we stay, as I said, absolutely addicted to needing to be approved of, or to seek the approval, or to have a boy or a girl or whatever tell us how great we are. We're going to stay infantilized around the idea of what our power is, which is youth and beauty. So what happens when youth and beauty go away? Well, the Maga tells us that actually this is the beginning, not the end. And I think it's a really powerful thing for all of us to bear witness to right now. So I'm just going to see how the Maga would like to connect with us today. So she's very strongly with us all, and there's a reason for that, because what she wants us to know is not only is she with us at that, you know, in that literal phase of our life, if we're in that age bracket in our lives now, but she's with every woman who is on the spiritual path. And the reason for that is that the Maga is really an outsider, and the reason she's an outsider is because she's not looking for your opinion. Your approval doesn't matter to her. So she is so self-sovereigning that she's willing to just take action that isn't going to be popular. So she's very clearly offering to all of us on the spiritual path the awareness that her fierce independence and her willingness to privilege her interior life above all else is righteous. I'm very much seeing the Saraswati energy in the Maga today, which is quite new. I haven't seen that association before. But it makes perfect sense. Saraswati is the Hindu goddess who is deeply committed to her interior life. She's the mystic, she's the scholar, she's the musician, she's the writer, she's the artist. And her greatest joy is to just be in solitude in her chambers creating, because that is really just what brings her the most joy. And I think for all women on the path of spiritual awakening, no matter your age, your willingness to choose to privilege your interior life above all else is one of the hardest choices that you will need to make, because the world will say, you're mine, you have to be available to me, you have to do the heavy lifting of raising the children and partnering, you have to make it all look easy, you have to continue to pursue your career, you have to look good while you're doing it, and you have to make sure everybody's needs are met before your own. And when we see the Maga's unfuckwithableness and her willingness to say, actually, okay, you can either spend time with me or not, but it really doesn't make any difference to who I know I am. You know, I get goosebumps thinking about that. What kind of freedom is that? Like, to be witness to your own life, to not require anybody else to offer that to you. So I really encourage you today to look at the places where you are holding your own power away from yourself by needing somebody else's approval. Even to go and do your spiritual seeking, it may be that you don't feel that you have sovereignty around that. That if you take an hour or half an hour at a certain point in the day and you say to your partner or whoever, take the kids, I'm off to, you know, hang out with God, that you would not have the spiritual self-esteem to do that. You would feel like you had to make everybody's dinner, make all the beds, get the kids in bed, you know, make everything perfect, and then you would be entitled to pursue that part of yourself. But I think that's something that we enslave ourselves to, that we feel this heavy responsibility that we have to take care of everybody else's needs first. And it's one of the things I have done quite well, I feel, in my life is to privilege my relationship with God first. And even if that meant making other people around me feel uncomfortable, it was never something that was up for negotiation. So I think what I will do, oh, my phone's there, don't worry, I'm on my phone and I'm looking for my phone. I just have a few minutes if anyone wants to share anything or ask any questions of the Maga, especially if you're in a phase of your life where you are needing self-sovereignty, self-determination, and an absolute capacity to withdraw your need for approval from others, and you'd like some support from the Maga around that. I'm very happy to respond to anything. As I said, she's one that you might overlook because you're not at that age yet, but really, please understand, these are not chronological, these aren't related to Earth time at all, really. The Maga is just that unstoppable power that rips away the veil of illusion. And I think I've just realized that because these were channeled, that the word rip or ripped is twice in her statement, which is quite a big yeah, it's a big kind of bold word here, but really that's it. Like, you know, if a marriage ends, or our children leave home, or they grow up and don't need us so much anymore, or we start to notice that we're aging, all of these things can become quite traumatic if you are not willing to mature. And that means not just physically mature, but to spiritually mature likewise, you know, in the same way. And that resistance to maturity is because the world tells us that our value decreases as we mature. So that's why we also have a lot of very superficial things in the world that we pretend give us meaning. Lisa says, the Maga came to me a few days ago, but I couldn't find much more info about her. Within or without? Because, you know, if you want to find more info about her, you just go within. If you would like me to connect to her for you, my darling, I'm very happy to do that. But it's very clear that her primary message for all of us is that, do you have what it takes to be fierce enough to rip away the veil of illusion now from your own eyes, that somehow your pursuit of yourself, your pursuit of God is secondary to the needs of everybody else? What if you just flip that on its head right now? What if you just say that, in order for me to function in the world, to show up as the mother, the wife, the, you know, worker, the carer, whatever it is that I need to do, the only way to do that is for me to 100% become self-approving, and that means to sit with God, to sit with myself as God, and that's my first task. And other things will have to wait in whatever way they need to wait, and to ask of others what you need, rather than, you know, I hear it so often, the way women try to achieve things in their homes, and I have to say, is there nobody there to support you? Is there no partner? And sometimes, of course, there isn't. Where some of us are single mothers. I am in quarantine with my ex, but still, you know, sometimes we're genuinely alone. But so often when I dig a little deeper, I discover that these women have perfectly capable men sitting in their homes with them, but they've never created a paradigm in which they could simply say, you are now responsible and I am no longer available. And I wonder why we get ourselves in those situations. I get quite fierce about this because I feel like it's a form of personal enslavement. We are, yes, I think, my darling, we are talking to you, to all of us, but I feel there's a lot there. What do I gain by enslaving myself to the role of wife and mother and worker? And what we gain is always getting to delay. Oh, sorry, there's a child screaming in the background. We always get to delay. We always get to delay. I may need to go. We'll just see what happens. I think it might be a Minecraft issue, but we'll find out in a moment. So yeah, I feel really strongly about the idea of us looking to the Maga now. Don't wait until your children leave home or your marriage has changed status or whatever it is. What would it take for you now to just be who you are without apology? And I would love for all of us to take her as our totem for the next little while, to see what it would take and where we're sitting in dis-ease around that, because that is the information that we need. So I, in the spirit of being a good mother, am going to go now so I can go find out what the screaming's about, even though there is a nanny out there with the children. I am so grateful for you all being here with me today. And of course, we have now 4 more days left together on our journey. And I'm really excited. Yes, Michelle says, the reality of working with children, it's less than a week, Michelle, less than a week till they're back at school. God bless you all. Mwah. Have a beautiful day.